Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Annabel Samimy. I'm a senior equity analyst at Stifel. And I want to thank the Sachs Forum for inviting me to participate in this first annual Obesity Innovation Forum. I've been working with companies in the obesity space or the cardiometabolic space for a couple of years now. And following this space has been head spinning, to say the least. So this conference really hits home that we've only just started scratching the surface of what is possible with obesity, despite the spectacular success of the GLP-1s or the incretins. Of course, we are just in the first chapters, and we have the honor of being able to host this great panel of innovators in the space who we think should be able to provide more incredible insights into how the space can evolve. And these are the companies and investors that will take us to chapters 2, 3, 4, and beyond. So let me just take the opportunity here. Allow me to introduce the panelists. So maybe we'll start with you, Edward.
Thank you, Annabel. My name is Edward van Wezel. I'm managing partner at BioGeneration Ventures, which is an early stage biotech fund based in close to Amsterdam, we always say, in a small village called Naarden. We have been active as investors for over 18 years. We're investing in early stage biotech therapeutic oriented companies. Our latest fund is a 150 million fund. We are therapeutic area agnostic. And obviously we have seen a significant growth of opportunities in this very exciting space, as Annabel just characterized it, also on our end. And we are also invested in a few opportunities there that I will be happy to talk about later. Thanks.
Hi, I'm Erik Ingelsson. I'm the Chief Scientific Officer at Wave Life Sciences. So Wave is a clinical stage biotech company built on oligonucleotide chemistry innovations that have unlocked the pipeline of transformative medicines. And one of our most recent achievements was the first ever RNA editing in human a couple of months ago in alpha-1 antitrypsin deficiency. And now we're moving into clinic with our siRNA for obesity. Focused on healthy weight loss or quality weight loss, where it's a primary focus on fat loss without any effects on muscle. And we can talk more about the details of that later.
Hi, everyone. My name is Harith Rajagopalan. Thanks for the invitation, Annabel, to join. I'm the CEO of Fractyl Health, and we're a metabolic therapeutics company focused on developing therapies that are targeting root causes of obesity and metabolic disease in the body with an effort to drive durable disease modification. And we have two approaches in development. One of them is a late-stage medical device-based procedure targeting the duodenum, which is showing promise in durable weight maintenance and is in a pivotal study for weight maintenance after the discontinuation of GLP-1 drugs. And the second approach is a preclinical platform for pancreatic gene therapy inspired by GLP-1 and incretin biology to deliver smart incretin therapy directly from the pancreatic beta cells in a nutrient-responsive manner. And that GLP-1 gene therapy will enter the clinic this year. Thanks. Nice to see you all.
Also, Anna, thank you for having me. My name is Renaud. I'm the CEO and president at Kailera Therapeutics. Kailera was launched formally back in October of last year, just about 3 months ago. And this was the joint effort of assets that were acquired out of Hungary Pharmaceuticals in Shanghai. This was backed by Bain Capital and Atlas Ventures with the help of RTW. We have one of the broadest and most advanced metabolics portfolios, we believe, outside of Big Pharma, with a lead program, Kai-9531, which was a dual agonist GLP-1 GIP that is in advanced clinical testing. We've looked at that, or Hungary has actually looked at that in close to 1,000 patients. Behind that, we have an oral small molecule GLP-1. Behind that, we also have an oral version of our dual agonist. And then behind that, we have a triple G injectable. Happy to share more about that.
Good afternoon. My name is Vipin Garg. Again, thank you for the invitation to join the panel. I'm CEO of a company called Altimmune. We are developing a GLP-1 glucagon dual agonist that we call pemvidutide. It's a fairly advanced stage asset. We've recently completed phase 2 trials in obesity on pemvidutide, and we've had a successful end of phase 2 meeting with the FDA, so we're ready to move into phase 3 with that program. Pemvidutide, we're also developing it for MASH, and we are expecting top-line data from our phase 2 trial in the second quarter of this year. The drug, as I said, it's a dual agonist, GLP-1 glucagon balanced. So in other words, equipotent for both of these receptors, for GLP-1 and for glucagon. The idea really here is to combine the complementary properties of GLP-1 with glucagon. GLP-1 for appetite suppression and glucagon for energy expenditure. In particular, glucagon turns on fat metabolism, which leads into all sorts of downstream benefits in this patient population. We'll talk more about that. Thank you.
Great. So maybe we can just start launching into how, what we're trying to address here. I guess over the course of our research in the field of obesity, we've had the opportunity to speak to a number of physicians in the field. And while they've all had success in treating their patients with incretins, cost and access aside, there are still obviously a number of shortcomings that all seem to coalesce around the same, handful of topics. That's, efficacy geared towards the poor responders or those who need, more tolerability, customizing treatment to treat underlying comorbidities, weight loss maintenance and durability to avoid the cycling, quality of weight loss, and obviously there's the convenience and accessibility aspect of it. So maybe first, as we think about weight loss, we're already starting to reach some pretty high levels of weight loss, close to bariatric levels with tirzepatide in the 1.5-year range. Retatrutide we're starting to see is approaching that bariatric level. When you think about innovation in the field and your own development programs, which of these shortcomings are you seeking to address first? And maybe we can just start down the line to whoever would like to answer that. Maybe, Erik, you can start, or anyone.
Sure, I'm happy to start, Annabel. So I think our approach is really trying to hit almost all of those, I would say. So maybe I'll just say a little bit more around what we're doing. So we're targeting a gene or a target called inhibin beta subunit E, or inhibin E for short. And this is a little bit like the PCSK9 of obesity, if you want. So it's the same way as PCSK9 was discovered using human genetics. This is the same case with this. So for inhibin E, there are loss of function variant carriers out there in the general population, and they're much healthier. So they have less abdominal obesity, less visceral fat measured with MRI, lower triglycerides, higher HDL, low risk cardiovascular disease and type 2 diabetes. So the way it works is that this is basically puts a brake on lipolysis of fat burning or breaking down of triglycerides. Our siRNA is basically mimicking the human genetics. We're basically removing that brake and therefore increasing the fat burning, and that this will lead to kind of lower abdominal fat. Now, we have been the first over the past year to move from the genetics into a medicine. So we have Wave 007. We're entering clinic in this quarter. We filed CTAs just like last month. And our in vivo data in diet-induced obesity mice looked really promising. It basically replicates what we were hoping to see from the human genetics. So in monotherapy, we see weight loss on par with semaglutide, same levels, but only with fat and primarily with visceral fat, no effect on muscle. Secondly, if you add it on top of semaglutide, we double the effect as compared to semaglutide alone. And thirdly, we do see that if we give our inhibin E drug just before cessation of semaglutide, we basically prevent the weight gain that you see upon cessation of semaglutide. So you get an off-ramp of GLP-1s. So all of those things together, plus with our chemistry and our preclinical data, we think we can get into once-a-year dosing, at most twice-a-year dosing. So I think, I'm not sure if I remember all 5, but I think we're kind of hitting a lot of them in terms of like quality weight loss, lower cardiovascular risk, a very different profile. Oh yeah, we're peripheral, so we're acting directly on fat, so we will not see the GLP-1 type of potential side effects, such as GI side effects, anhedonia, sarcopenia, those type of things, because we're acting directly on the fat cells. It's also nice because it's an orthogonal approach. You can see the synergies there. You can potentially do it together with GLP-1s. So I think we hit a lot of those gaps.
And Harith, maybe down the line.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I might just start, if you think about unmet needs in the space right now and acknowledge the potency and availability of tirzepatide and semaglutide, I might just make an observation. There's an article in ABC this morning saying that West Virginia has decided that they can't continue to pay for GLP-1s because when they've been offering it to the patients in their panel, so many people stopped taking the medicines that they were seizing to benefit from it, and the payers were wondering, why are we paying for these drugs? And so I would point to the inability to maintain the benefits from these drugs as the single biggest unmet need that I think needs to be tackled, because most people who start these medicines don't stay on them. And we've been a company that's been focused on targeting root causes of obesity since our inception. And one of the things that our first asset, which targets a root cause of obesity in the gut, in the duodenum, is a device. And the reason it's a device is because we observe scientifically that high-fat, high-sugar diets are causing pathology in the lining of the gut and altering gut-brain signals. And so if you ablate the duodenal mucosa, you can actually reverse the pathology, regenerate a healthy new lining, and restore normal nutrient sensing and signaling mechanisms from the gut that are supposed to help you normally feel full after a meal, but which don't really work well in people with obesity. And so we were running studies in type 2 diabetes for a very long time when we observed that if you follow these patients out for 2-3 years, they are maintaining a lower body weight set point without any ongoing diet or lifestyle intervention. We talked to investors about this for years in type 2 diabetes, but no one was really that interested in weight maintenance as a problem to be solved even 2 or 3 years ago. But we were approached by major players in the space in 2023 because of the rate of discontinuation of these drugs. And so we moved quickly into a pivotal trial, leveraging our type 2 diabetes experience, and are beginning to see, and we'll be presenting some early data on Monday, the ability to get people off tirzepatide without regaining body weight. And I think that if we are able to do that, then it may offer an entirely new and exciting paradigm for care, which would be potential for multi-year durability of weight loss maintenance after an induction phase caused by incretin therapy. And so that's our lead asset. But we also think that GLP-1 biology is incredible beyond its weight loss benefits if you can get over the tolerability issues, as you just mentioned. And so we've been developing a pancreatically administered gene therapy, which, as I mentioned earlier, is a nutrient-responsive release of GLP-1. And in preclinical studies in both diabetic and in obese mice, when we compare it to semaglutide, a single administration of this GLP-1 gene therapy seems to be more potent, more durable, and one and done relative to ongoing semaglutide administration. And in mice where we gave semaglutide chronically and then stopped the semaglutide and randomized them to either vehicle or gene therapy, the vehicles regained all of their body weight and all of their metabolic profiles as one would expect. But when we crossed them over to the gene therapy, they maintained all of the metabolic benefit that they had from the semaglutide itself. So 2 different approaches targeting the gut and the pancreas respectively, but both of which are really aimed at addressing both the tolerability and the durability / weight maintenance questions, with data coming this year.
Ron, how are you prioritizing your broad portfolio?
Yeah, so I mean, these are important questions, because I think we've spent, probably the better part of the last 3 years, we were just talking a little bit before we walked up here about how quickly can we get these patients to north of 20% body weight loss. And so there's been this race to get there. And in the course of doing that, we see these tolerability issues, right? You have to titrate these doses up. And so as we think about our portfolio, which is specifically focused on, or at least our lead program right now is an injectable GLP-1, GIP, where we know there's considerable experience that's out there. We also know that, as has been pointed out here and in a number of the panels this morning, roughly a third of the patients stay on and the other 2/3 fall off within the first 3 months of treatment. They decide to do something else. I think a lot of that has to do with how these drugs are being administered, how quickly we're titrating the doses up, and how can we take a closer look at that to potentially manage that. So having a portfolio like we have at Kailera, we can do that. We're not going to be the first in class here. Our goal is to be best in class. And so we're going to do that by taking a very close look at how we titrate these doses up. And then how do we manage these patients over the longer term? If you can get these patients out to 52 weeks and north of 20% body weight loss, they're not going to want to be on an injectable forever. And so can you transition those patients over to an oral therapy? Because the oral therapies at the outset, I think, are going to have a hard time matching the efficacy that we see with the injectables. That being said, not every patient is going to need to get to 20+% weight loss. And so I think there's going to be a number of options over the next 3 to 4 to 5 years that are going to address a lot of these tolerability issues. Hopefully, many of them come from Kailera, but I think there's at this table here, there's going to be a lot of terrific treatment options that are well beyond what's out there today.
And maybe Vipin, you can talk about your angle of what you are prioritizing as the most unmet need.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one thing is clear just based on this panel, that there's going to be innovation and there's going to be segmentation. The market is just, as you said, it's chapter 1. So, we've got long ways to go. You look at any of the therapeutic areas, blood pressure, medication. I mean, 20 years ago, we had very few mechanisms of action. Now we have 20 different mechanisms to treat blood pressure, as an example. So that same thing is going to happen in obesity. Obesity is not one disease. It may be one symptom that we are treating, but how people get there is different from one person to the other, and the comorbidities are different. So we have to focus on each and every comorbidity differently, rather than saying mine is better than yours. What it is that which patient segment your drug is better suited, and that's really how it's going to be practiced, the medicine. So for us, we're focused on lipid metabolism because of glucagon. Glucagon is turning on energy expenditure by activating lipolysis and lipid metabolism. So rather than using muscle as a source of fuel, we're using lipids, which then results into better quality of weight loss. We have shown class-leading preservation of lean muscle mass from our phase 2 data. So again, that's important. And tolerability is also important. So what we have done is we have actually made a chemical modification to the dual agonist. So we have slow uptake in the bloodstream. So you don't get a high Cmax. So the Cmax is lower and Tmax is longer. As a result, we don't see as much tolerability issues. Our lowest dose, which actually produces significant weight loss, is very similar to placebo. So you can actually start the patient at 1.2 milligram, which is the lowest dose, see how the patient does, and then increase them to the next dose or the next dose. So our plan is to get 3 doses into phase 3, all 3 of them approved. So really you have the ability, flexibility to, that's how medicine is practiced. You typically start at the lowest effective dose and then work your way up. So the idea is to really combine these 3 things. If you look at the obesity space, it really evolves out of diabetes. The first generation drugs are all diabetes drugs. Going forward, and diabetes, only about 20 to 25% of patients with obesity have diabetes. Dyslipidemia, elevated liver fat, about 70% of the patients have these. So again, the market is going to segment, and that's what we're trying to do, is to bring a solution to these patients that have high liver fat and high serum lipids.
And maybe Edward, now that we've gotten the great introduction from all the different companies, you can talk about from an investor perspective, how do you prioritize the number of companies that come into you on a regular basis, with their differentiation or different aspects of differentiation?
Yeah, it's a very good question. And of course, we've seen a lot of new opportunities in this field coming along, while for only a few years ago, we would see very little in the obesity space. And as investors, we also fall victim to the same craze, right? We really would like to do something in this space and try to ride the wave of the innovation that is taking place. And that's what we would look for, particularly because we're an early stage investor. We would look for real novel innovation that can add something to existing therapies, probably in maybe 5 to 7 years from today, because we also need to understand it takes time to develop and to better understand the biology. So things like energy expenditure, for example, is something that we will be and are interested in. And one of our companies has identified a target that we are currently addressing, and we hope to build on that. Other opportunities like new targets based on genetic screens that were identified, like GPR75, are of course also things that we are interested in if companies have something in that space. So there are many different angles that you could look at this. We would not easily go into further development of GLP-1s or anything that is associated to that, as we see the level of activity at this stage already so high. It will be very difficult to differentiate on the longer term. So that's where we focus on, and it's super interesting to follow what is happening in this space. And I think you're right; things will probably differentiate further, and the market will segment itself in things that we don't know, or areas that we are maybe not aware of. Maybe further ideas about metabolic syndrome could be developed. We're all very interested to better understand, but all based on sound science and biology that we try to identify and then work with the founding teams to build companies around those ideas.
Great. So I want to touch on something that was mentioned: the quality of weight loss. That's something that's become a focus, and KOLs we speak with, have indicated that, muscle loss is not unexpected when you have such extreme weight loss, and they have found ways to manage around that. But it sounds like it's a situation of, if you build it, they will come. So maybe you can talk about your perspectives around this and maybe help us reconcile, I guess, physicians. I don't want to call it complacency. That's probably too strong a word, but they're not as concerned about the muscle loss aspect of it versus companies who are starting to focus a lot more on the quality of weight loss. So maybe we can talk about that. I know that you're all developing something in that category. So let's start with you, Vipin.
First of all, we really don't have enough data at this point. We're really reacting to the data that's been generated in just last 2 years. So think about somebody being on these types of medications for 10 years, 20 years. What happens at that point? On top of that, when people go off these medications, they actually put on more fat rather than muscle. So you got this ratcheting effect going on. If you don't stay on the medication and you get off the drug, you're actually putting weight back on, but it's the bad weight you're putting on, not good. So I think long term, it's going to be more about weight maintenance rather than just weight loss. And I think that's where the field is going to move. And the FDA is actually asking for that. So, and we'll ask for that what is the quality of weight loss 20 years down the line, 10 years down the line? And that's where preservation of muscle mass comes in. So we think it's very critical. As you said, once you provide that option, once you give that option to physicians, to patients, they would go for it. There's no question you would want to preserve, there is so much discussion as we get older. How do we preserve our muscle mass, or how do we rebuild it? And this is going to be part of that same discussion.
Yeah. I mean, I think this will continue to evolve over time, and we've seen the thinking on this, even with the FDA, has changed pretty dramatically in the new issued guidance that they put out last week. I mean, if we look at the profound weight loss that we're seeing across the board, it's no surprise that we're going to see muscle loss. To try to say this is specifically because of any specific therapy, I think it's a bit of a bridge too far. I think what we're going to have to really rely on, and you touched on it, is physicians are going to still have to not be lazy about making sure that they manage how their patients do everything else besides take these weight loss therapies, managing their weight loss. If you have a patient that gets bariatric surgery, there's muscle wasting that happens with that. If you have a patient that ends up in the hospital with something that has nothing to do with weight loss, but by default, whether it's some other long hospitalization, they will have they will have some level of muscle wasting. They will have some level of even bone mineral density loss. It kind of goes with the territory. And so I think we are going to have an overall kind of gestalt on how we manage these patients going forward to manage that quality of weight loss.
I think that I'm part of these conversations all the time, and I feel like we're conflating two separate issues that I'd like to separate when we talk about quality of weight loss. I think one of the issues is what happens on the way down when you're losing the weight, and how much of the weight that you are losing is the weight that you want to lose, adipose, and not weight that you don't want to lose. The other one is what happens, as Vipin said, when people cycle on and off, and then over time their body composition changes quite dramatically. Arguably, one of them is a question around the therapeutic effect and the toxicity profile of the therapy. And then the second question is one around its real-world implementation, and then the challenges that are posed by the natural expectation that we all have that people cannot stay on these drugs for the rest of their lives, and most people will cycle. I'm a cardiologist, and so I've been particularly interested in the data around muscle mass in the heart with these drugs. But any evidence that I can find suggests that muscle mass is reduced and muscle function in the heart is improved. I think that's consistent with the cardiovascular data, the heart failure data. It's true from bariatric surgery as well. And so I find myself very confused about whether muscle loss on the way down from these drugs is actually a problem for most people. I tend to think it's really not a problem. I think that the much bigger problem is the cycling issue, because I think that we are now beginning to see documentation that people become progressively sarcopenic on and off therapy. And I think that is a problem that absolutely does need to be solved. But the drugs themselves causing muscle loss, I'm not sure that on therapy that's an issue.
I just wanted to point out that in our phase 3 program, we actually designed a unique separate study just to look at body composition, and that was very highly welcomed by the FDA. So going forward, FDA is going to want to see to the extent you can provide that data. So it is, even on the way down, you're better off if you're not losing as much muscle mass as on semaglutide up to 40%, which is significant. So if you can reduce that by half or bring it to a lower number, that will always be desirable.
Maybe just to add, so as Ron pointed out already, I think there's an increasing understanding of the importance of the quality of weight loss, and the FDA draft guidance that came out last week really puts a strong emphasis on that the fat loss, preservation of lean mass, I do think that's going to be increasingly important, and also coupled to the fact that you want to actually decrease cardiovascular risk. That's ultimately what you're after. It's not the aesthetic medicine you're trying to develop. So I think those things are very important. As several other panelists have already also said, I think it's important to find the off-ramps. So that's probably one of the things that we were most encouraged by, actually, when we saw our data, that there's this opportunity for us to go into that space where we can think about, because GLP-1 agonists are there already, and there are a lot of people getting on them, but quite many get side effects. And it doesn't have to be the sarcopenia, it could be the GI side effects as well. And then to have a way of kind of getting off of that without regaining your weight back, I think that's going to be quite critical for the future.
Great. So I want to touch on the heterogeneity of the obesity population. It's probably one of the most heterogeneous indications you'll ever find, given when you consider all the different comorbidities. So when you think about your study, do we need to start tailoring studies for these various different populations as opposed to just launching clinical trials with BMIs of greater than 30 or BMIs greater than 27 with a comorbidity? Like, how are you thinking about starting to tailor trials to the mechanisms that you're looking at specifically? Maybe anyone could throw, launch in there.
Yeah, maybe I'll just jump in. I mean, this is something we think about every day, and I wish every day that we did think about this, we came up with the same idea, because it would make this a lot easier. But, it's true. There's going to have to be some tailoring that does happen as we treat these patients, because the high BMI patients, of course, we're going to want to manage those patients much more acutely, get their weight down to a more manageable place as quickly as possible. On the other hand, for patients that, may have a low BMI but other comorbidities, that definitely could be a completely different treatment approach, and it's going to require multiple mechanisms to make that happen. And so I do believe, and we were talking a little bit even at the beginning, if it's a MASH patient population, is that going to require a combination that is going to be completely different than maybe strictly a diabetes patient population or sleep apnea or something else? And so I don't see how there's going to be a one size fits all for this as we move forward. And that's a great thing about the company is represented by this panel, but everybody else that's out there right now focused on this. There's going to be multiple ways to treat this.
Yeah, I would just add that the good news is that there's an opportunity to design trials around different segments of patient population, because the safety database required is pretty large. So you need about 5,000 patients exposure. So you don't want to take all 5,000 patients and throw them in one study design or one trial. You have to do a basic study. We just completed our end of phase 2 meeting, and we have clear direction from agreement with the FDA to move forward on our phase 3 program. And our phase 3 program is divided into 4 separate studies. So one is sort of the main obesity study, where we're looking at bread and butter obesity, high BMI, and bring their weight down. But then second study is designed to show benefits in lipid profiles, so dyslipidemia. So we're looking at serum lipids, which is accepted marker of cardiovascular risk. Obviously, patients with obesity don't die because they're obese. They die because of cardiovascular disease. So you want to show that benefit. The third study is designed to show benefit in patients with high liver fat content, elevated liver fat content. So again, it's that bridge to MASH and MASLD. And then the fourth study, which I believe we're the first company that has designed that study, is the body composition study. So within our 5,000 patient phase 3 program, we've got these different patient populations. And the idea is to show benefits of glucagon or turning on that lipid metabolism, the benefits of that in different segments of the patient population.
Great. So, I just want to go back to, the heterogeneity for a minute and just talk about how these drugs evolved. I mean, Novo and Lilly, they've been investing in the benefit in all sorts of comorbidity, but it really, the benefit of obesity came out of type 2 diabetes, like you said. And so now they've been studying in all sorts of different various indications. Do you think that development in the clinic now is moving sufficiently in a way that the market is going to start to fragment? And at what stage do you see this market fragmentation beginning? Because right now it looks like it's just, obesity is a monolith at this point. And so how, at what point does this market fragment? And anyone can jump in here.
Yeah, I mean, so the FDA, again, has given us some pretty specific guidelines on how to manage forward. So if it's weight loss, there's a pretty rigid path we need to go down. If it's type 2 diabetes, there's another pretty rigid path. I think unless and until you achieve both of those, then we can't start to fragment. So I think we'll see some of the market leaders, some of the current market players do some of that diversification in advance of the opportunities for us to do it. Vipin's company seems to be ahead on that as they're looking at MASH and some of these other liver-related diseases. And so until we get past those kind of core that bolus of core work that you have to do, then I think over the next 24 to 36 months, we will see a significant amount of diversification. People are going to want to see where we can take these mechanisms beyond obesity and diabetes as quickly as we can, whether it's neurodegeneration. Again, we talked about sleep apnea. We talked about there's 12 obesity-related cancers. There's 200 different obesity-related diseases and disorders. And now the FDA is actually calling obesity a disease. So I think that opens the door for us to start really exploring these in a much more programmed way.
Yeah, I mean, there's even a scenario where you can imagine that your lead indication is actually one of the comorbidity, and obesity is the secondary endpoint, because all of these studies, these are comorbidities of obesity. So in all these studies, you would still measure weight loss. So that becomes a secondary endpoint. The first generation drugs, they came into into these trial designs through obesity, and now they're adding secondary endpoints as additional indications. You can actually flip it and have obesity as being the secondary endpoint and comorbidity as being the primary endpoint.
I think that we have to just acknowledge, though, that the current major players in the space are carving out very, very broad territory with their GLPs and their GIP combos, right? So we already are going to see MASH data. We all seen sleep apnea data. We've seen kidney data, and the pleiotropic benefits that exist are going to become the precursor upon which all of the differentiation may need to be evaluated. And I firmly believe that a lot of the differentiation may be pragmatic based on the data that are generated, based on our evolving understanding of the field. But there's a lot of field that has already, where the seeds have been sown years ago, with the incretin therapies in particular. I think novel mechanisms, novel combinations may afford novel insights, but I don't know that we know enough yet to know exactly how. Like, I'm thinking about Erik's program with Inhibin E and what that may or may not manifest in terms of differentiated profile, or our strategies, which are also off-ramps to GLP-1s, leveraging novel mechanisms, and whether they may offer new insights into differentiation. But GLP-1 and GIP-GLP-1 combos, I think we're learning a lot about how broadly applicable they are. And I think that will be a challenge for differentiation.
Edward, you look like you want to jump in here.
No, I just wanted to say that with the change in the market perception of this space over the last few years, of course, in a positive manner, that capital that is available both from a couple of very large pharma companies, but also from the venture capital side, that will drive that innovation that we all believe will happen. And I am convinced that we will find some of the answers, at least, to these questions, and trying to improve the therapies that are currently there. So I think from that perspective, I fully agree that is the way that things will likely develop, and we'll see in the next couple of years how that will pan out. But I think it's for this space that has been sort of dead in the water for many, many years. I've been active in this field for over 15 years. This is the first time that we actually see some activity in this space that is really very significant. And this will allow us to create a better understanding of the fundamental biology which is needed, I think. And there is a lot to do still, but I am confident that we will get to very significant steps in the next couple of years.
I'm going to jump to another big area, which is efficacy in the context of tolerability. Because based on the figures that we all know, 30% of patients discontinue within 4 weeks. Maybe you have less than 50% that stay on treatment for the full 12 months. And tolerability is one of the primary reasons. And physicians have found ways to manage around tolerability. But can you innovate around tolerability? I guess that's one of the questions. Or is this just something that needs to be managed by the treating physician and accepted by the patient? So maybe anyone who wants to launch in there.
Maybe I can start on that one. So yeah, of course you can innovate around tolerability. I think, one way, and this goes back to the last topic as well a little bit, that one way of thinking about it is to try to think about new mechanisms that aren't kind of going with the same. So again, as I talked a little bit about before, we have a direct effect on fat cells with, basically increasing fat burning lipolysis, meaning that we will have a different side effect profile, hopefully no side effect profile, with very rare injections once or twice a year. So, I think it's important for the field to continue with this kind of innovation and trying to come up with new mechanisms that aren't really going down the same path as the existing medicine. So that's one way of getting around that and seeing a different profile.
Anyone else want to throw an idea in there?
So I just wanted to add to that, if you think about tolerability, it's all about sparing GLP-1 effect. If you keep pushing GLP-1, you're going to get tolerability issues. So there's something else we can add to GLP-1 that can complement the effect of GLP-1s, thereby reducing the need for GLP-1, but perhaps still getting the same outcome in terms of weight loss and other benefits that we're looking for. So that's sort of what we thought when we added glucagon to GLP-1, because it's a different mechanism. We're combining appetite suppression with energy expenditure. So it's really they're complementary. It's like diet and exercise rather than just diet alone. So that's one way to think about it, but other combination therapies would also be an answer to that. GLP-1, GIP, they pretty much do the same thing, that you're really doubling up on the same effect here in terms of appetite suppression. So there are many different ways to think about it. That's just one of the ways to how you can overcome that tolerability issues. There's also design of the molecule itself, how quickly it rushes into the bloodstream. Most of these tolerability issues, if you look at the data, point to very fast uptake or concentration in the blood. If you can reduce that, if you can slow that down, that should have some improvement. We've seen that in our data. Our lowest dose is very similar to placebo. It's an active dose as opposed to, so it doesn't need to be titrated. Even our middle dose may not have to be titrated. And the high dose you can titrate if you need to go up there. And you can actually do it with very short duration titration. So we've seen that effect already.
Excellent.
I just want to add, I'm going to come back to the, especially with the dual agonist injectables to start. The titration phase of this, if you look at where most of the patients discuss and report the AEs that are associated with tolerability, it's in that titration phase. When they get to steady state dosing on these dual agonists or any of the other mechanisms, they tend to be much more comfortable after the titration phase. So I think as an industry, as a group that's focused on these programs, we've got to figure out how to titrate these doses up in a much more user-friendly way. And so I think, now, of course, we have our protocols with our study schemas, and we have very specific ways that we will titrate these doses up. I think in the real world, 3 to 4 to 5 years from now, patients are actually going to self-titrate. They'll figure it out themselves. We'll have mechanisms, we'll have auto-injector pens that will allow patients to do that self-dose titration and manage their own nausea, vomiting, GI-related AEs that go along with this. I think we're in the early stages of that, but if you look at where this happens, most of it's in the titration phase.
We also have to keep in mind that today, entire treatment of obesity patients is really specialty doctors who are treating them. So if this is going to become a multi-billion-dollar market, it has to move into primary care, just like diabetes and blood pressure and so on. And primary care docs really don't want to deal with titration. They don't want a patient coming in 6 times over the course of next 6 months and monitoring their progress. So to them, we've done surveys that show very clearly the primary care docs would prefer something that they don't have to titrate, they don't have to bother with. And patients will prefer that too. So I think that's an important consideration going forward.
Mm-hmm. All right, I'm going to say something a little bit contrarian here. So we know all the drugs are injectables right now. They're weekly injectables, and there's clearly been a big push to develop orals. And in our conversations with physicians, we've been surprised at I guess their receptivity to orals. They're like, our patients are doing just fine on injectables. The pens are so easy. We know that they take it, once a week. We know they're getting it, and they're totally receptive to that. So why don't you tell us what the use case is for the orals? Being totally contrarian here. I know what they are, but maybe you can correct my thinking or not on that. So Ron, you've got some orals or Vipin.
I mean, there's no question that if you have an oral medication that can do the same thing as an injectable, people would prefer oral. I think this just makes sense. But having said that, as you said, people are quite happy. They've been taking injectables, particularly if it's once a week and it's more efficacious. People are looking for that. I think there's a number of challenges with oral. You can develop a oral small molecule therapy for a monoagonist. When you're looking at dual agonists, peptides are the best way to go after 2 separate receptors in the same molecule. So I think that becomes a challenge. If you try to come up with a dual agonist that's a small molecule, chances are it's going to have some off-target effects and could have toxicity, because you can't design a small molecule that can go into different binding pockets and have the same effect. So I think that becomes a challenge. So I mean, ultimately, I think there's a need for oral medications, and there will be oral drugs. They're going to expand the market. Flexibility or optionality is important to many patients. Some patients simply don't want to take an injectable, so it'll expand the market. We already have the data from Rybelsus versus Ozempic. Rybelsus, when it came on the market, didn't really replace Ozempic, but it actually expanded the market. So there will be need for orals.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think, with regard to, we spent a lot of time talking about the injectables, the auto injectors, and we hear a lot of times, well, you can't be on that forever. Well, why not? I mean, diabetics are on injectables forever. When in the early days of statins, there was a lot of discussion, well, these are toxic, and will people really be on statins forever? And now we, hear very common, statin should be in the drinking water. So I think we're still in the very, very early days of how these drugs are going to be used in the mainstream 5 to 10 years from now. And I think where orals fit in are going to be somewhere on the lines of either maintenance therapy, or if you're not looking for that 20 to 30% weight loss that needs to be treated acutely. I think in those patients, we're still only addressing mid-single digits in terms of the overall patient population of people that could actually benefit from these injectable drugs. And so, we're still in the early days. And if you think about, statins, I think, are just a great analogy. It wasn't until we were 15 years into the launch of statins where people started to pay attention. You saw on television commercials, know your number. And there was the direct-to-consumer advertising. That was the 5th statin to market that made that happen. And so, I still think we've got a long road before we actually know what's going to really happen here. And I think orals will have a role to play, but probably more on the maintenance side.
I'm going to match your contrarian
Okay.
view with my own contrarian view, which is I think that small molecules, in basically any disease category you've looked at, have penetrated more deeply than injectables have. As a physician myself, I will tell you that we tend to be really bad at thinking about what's next. And so when they say, oh, my patients are really happy, a lot of that is because they're not really hearing the honest view from patients on what they actually want. And I think if there were all else being equal, I think there's a lot of surveys out there suggesting that people would prefer a small molecule to an injectable if all else were equal. My contrarian view is that actually only still solves a small portion of the single biggest problem of persistence and lack of long-term adherence to therapy. Because statin is a great example. I was a cardiology fellow at the Brigham when we gave patients free Lipitor and after a heart attack and delivered it to their door. And then we measured how many of them were still taking it. And 50% of people stopped taking Lipitor 6 months afterwards when it was delivered to their doorstep for free after a heart attack. So that tells me that long-term adherence and compliance is actually fundamentally an unsolvable problem for at least half of the market. And I think that's where, this concept of needing durable treatments, needing an off-ramp to chronic therapy, needing something that is truly has long-term effect, still has an important role to play. But the market today is extraordinarily obsessed with, what company has better weight loss at 6 weeks on maximum dose of therapy in 7 patients. It's like a ridiculous focus, which is totally irrelevant to the problem of obesity, and yet is driving so much investor attention and decision making that is completely not at all addressing anything that actually really matters.
Erik, you want to say?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Harith really put the finger on this. Like, the compliance issue is a big one. We'll see what happens with orals. But again, when we speak to KOLs or investors, they're very kind of impressed by the once-a-year injection. That seems very easy to do within a yearly annual. Some of them are even saying it's like a obesity vaccine. Not sure if that's a good thing in the future administration, but anyway. So I think it comes down to what's the frequency of injections. I think that's important.
And Erik, if you like your once a year, then we'll be having data coming soon for a once and done. So we'll see how that goes.
Well, this was a very interesting conversation. We've got 3 seconds to wrap up, so I'm sorry we can't take any questions, but I think you
I
got
just
an
wanted
idea.
to say that
Yeah.
wasn't the contrarian view at all. We all agree with you, by the way, so we're good.
All right, thank you very much. Appreciate the time.